Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I want to talk with you today about happiness. They always say, the pursuit of happiness should be the goal in life. I'm not so sure. I think the goal should be contribution, but that's beside the point for today. Certainly, no one could argue against the goal of being happier, or at least being more contented. So I want to talk first about the upside, about how one can get happier just in general, but then also managing the negative emotions. Now, I'm not talking about somebody who has got severe depression or severe anxiety that requires medication and medical interventions of various sorts, let alone electroconvulsive therapy. I'm talking about the garden variety: anxiety, fear, sadness, anger, guilt and shame, that all of us feel at some point or another, and just sharing what is hopefully a little bit of uncommon sense advice. I like to think, and I said this in a previous episode, because I'm not one of these genetically happy people who just preordained to be chirpy, in some ways I'm in a better position to help those of you who are also not just happy-go-lucky by nature, because I've had to work at it. I've had to learn what works for a person who's not constitutionally chipper. I'm no hail fellow well met, to use an old term. So here's how I've, not just me, but I think some of my clients have benefited, have become happier or more contented with some of these tactics or strategies. The first, and it's an obvious one, but even though I'm not a Christian, the very Christian notion of gratitude is very important. It just reminds you, it's not going to be the magic pill. There aren't no magic pills. But being grateful for everything, that bite of food that you love. There's a reason people say grace before a meal. It does remind us to be grateful for the food, for the fact that we are hopefully healthy, or even if we're not healthy. God forbid we have stage 4 cancer. In that moment that you're able to enjoy something and not writhing in agony, there is something to be grateful for. So, grateful as Christians, again, they're very grateful to God's handiwork, that they look at nature and they see greatness in that and comfort. Grateful for any good relationships you have in your life. Grateful for any work you get to do, whether paid or volunteer. Grateful for the hobbies that you have. And I swear to you, I'm not trying to say that I'm like this all the time, that I'm in this constant state of gratitude. No, absolutely not. I'm just saying that trying to feel a little more grateful when you're aware of something. When my wife and I sit and watch movies or TV stuff on our big screen TV in our room, I am grateful for our cocoon, very. And I actually say it quite a bit to my wife. She's not quite as on board with all this gratitude stuff, but I think it makes me happier. And maybe it'll make you happier. What else do I do to make myself happy? I really do. I don't give a shit. All right, I'll just say shit. I don't give a shit what society expects me to do. I'm happiest when I'm working. When I'm seeing clients, virtually of course these days, or doing these YouTube videos, or writing my Psychology Today articles for 60 hours a week. And I'm 70 years old and I do it, and I hope to do it. I'm grateful for my health to this point. And I want to keep doing it because it makes me more, not happier, more contented. And the recreations I do, I am unconventional. I don't like to travel. I don't like to dance. I don't like parties. But part of being happier is, of course we have to make compromises at times for our spouse, for society. I'm not above making compromises, but where possible, I spend as much discretionary time doing what I want. Playing with my doggie, taking hikes, which I love to do, going shopping, I love Trader Joe's, watching movies, as I said, with my wife, playing the piano, reading, I love to read. And if I'm not like everybody else, I don't give a crap about pop culture, I don't give a crap about fashion, I don't give a fuck about... fuck. I guess it's a podcast, I'm allowed to say that. I'm so used to being on NPR where you can't say any of the heavy seven. But this is, I guess, is more liberating in that sense. Anyway, I spend as much discretionary time doing the things that I like, independent of what society thinks. Okay. What else? Is there anything else I do to make myself happier? I accept myself. I am not attractive. Yes, I position, if you're watching me on YouTube, you see I've got the webcam positioned so that my entire bald head doesn't show. I'll lean over there. I'm really bald. I hate it. I would love to have a lovely full head of hair, but I don't. So I just don't think about it. I accept myself. I have strengths. I have weaknesses. And I just focus as much as I can. I try not to beat myself up for my weaknesses. I'm intense. I tend to, be impulsive, and I do my impulsive statements are right most of the time, but every once in a while I put my foot in my mouth and I get in trouble. But I try to just suppress it. As soon as I screw up, I try to suppress all that, and I just think about the next positive thing I can do. Among, for example, the things that I was just talking about. And I think those three things are the things that make me most happy. Gratitude, spending as much discretionary time doing what I feel is right, and then self-acceptance. Okay, now we're going to turn to the kind of the negative things that we feel. It could be anxiety, fear, sadness, anger, guilt, and shame. Again, I am not a clinical psychologist. I do have a PhD. One of my specialties was school psychology, but that hardly makes me a clinical psychologist. And I do not suffer from great anxiety or fear. I guess I do. That's not true. Okay, I'll talk about those things. Anyway, forget about me. What counts is you. And again, this is not for people who have severe clinical, what they might call major depression, for example. This is for garden variety people and their emotional negatives. And maybe there's some hopefully some value. So how do my clients and I deal with anxiety and fear? There's a few things. First of all, one thing that I found very helpful is to face the worst realistic possibility. Let's say, for example, you have an upcoming medical exam, just your regular wellness exam. It is possible they'll discover, and the worst thing I guess they can think of is that the exam shows you have advanced cancer. It's about as bad as it gets. Facing that and saying, okay, it probably won't happen, but even if it did, worst case, it'll help me make the most of whatever time I have left. And if I find the pain or the treatment too odious, fortunately I live in a state in which the doctor can off you. I'll ask the doctor to send me to La La Land. Facing that worst case is going to reduce your anxiety facing your medical appointment. And then also focusing on the positive. Chances are your doctor will say, great, or make these little changes, or whatever. And then you'll have a year worth of reassurance. So one way to deal with fear and anxiety is to face the worst, while also acknowledging the best. There are certain things you can't do anything about. There are things that are out of your control. Let's say you've applied for a job. You've had 3 interviews. You're really excited about the job. You're hoping that you get the job. But you've done everything you can. You've had the 3 interviews. You sent a really intelligent, thoughtful follow-up letter. You've asked your friend to make a call on your behalf. And now, all you can do is suppress. Not repress. Repress is an unconscious process. Suppress is consciously. Suppress thoughts about that job and distract yourself to something positive. That's a great way to deal with anxiety. I know that the shrinks always say, no, you shouldn't suppress anything because it'll only come up elsewhere. At least I have found, and my clients have found, that when you have something you're anxious about, you can't do anything about, the best thing you can do is to consciously suppress it and redirect. Now, of course, if you're anxious about something and you can do something about it, of course you should do that. No question. But then once you've done that, and you don't, it isn't resolved, and maybe it's ambiguous, it may take time for it to see whether it works or not, suppress. Consciously say stop to yourself and redirect yourself to something constructive and positive. That's a really helpful way to deal with anxiety. What else? Take your attention away from yourself. I've seen a lot of people, and frankly, it's disproportionate to those who've had a lot of therapy, who end up focusing on themselves too much. and what I call first world problems, or their anxiety. Some of the most potent anti-anxiety medication you can do is to stop thinking about yourself and focus on others, especially helping others. That's really a great way to just stop being so anxious. Just doing your work or whatever, but stop focusing on yourself. This notion that you should express your feelings, talk about your feelings. I find that so often you talk, and there was a study done about teenage girls. Teenage girls who talk more about their feelings were more anxious. Now, maybe they started that way, but I think they controlled for that in the study. Stop thinking about yourself so much, especially if there's nothing you can particularly do about it. Focus on helping others, or your work, or whatever. Okay, now sadness. I am constitutionally a sad person, not depressed. There's a big difference. I go through the world as a 4 on the 10 scale, with a 0 being, curled up in bed, depressed, and a 10 being, happy-go-lucky, giggly person. I'm a 4, like my dad was, exactly. And I accept it. I realize that there are a lot of people who by nature are chirpy and upbeat, and there are some people who make themselves, who are really inside unhappy, but because the norm in America is to be upbeat, not be hysterically upbeat, but moderately upbeat, they fake it. I accept that I'm a modestly sad person, and when bad stuff happens, I go from a 4 to a 2. But I think that a lot of, of course there's situational sadness, but I think my sadness is just who I've always been. I've been a kind of a sober, not pretty sober in the alcohol sense, but also just a pretty sober person by nature. I don't laugh as much as most people do. So I think if you're dealing with sadness, and if it's constitutional, if you've kind of always had that tendency, then self-acceptance is probably the best tool. Now, of course, if it's situational sadness, somebody dies, you lost your spouse, you got a bad grade on your report card, you got a bad performance evaluation at work. Well, no one's saying you shouldn't feel sad about that. That's just human. But if you can compartmentalize it and not, there's this tendency I just don't agree with, which is you've got to process the sadness and process the loss, and some people do. Like I have a dear friend who lost his loving spouse, who he really loved a lot. And he insisted that he needed to take months to process, but it felt like the more months that went by, the more he was upset about it. It was more top of mind. I've seen other people who've lost a spouse that they love, and after the socially acceptable amount of mourning, and some legitimate heartfelt mourning, they went out and realized that their spouse would want them to get into other relationships, and did so quite quickly, if that's what they wanted, or they celebrated the freedom of not having to be in a relationship. So I'm not a big fan of processing. I guess that's why I tell my career and personal coaching clients I'm the untherapist. I'm not about revisiting past iniquities that your mother, your father did to you, your past failings, because I find that in general it doesn't make you happier and it doesn't solve problems. Whatever benefit you can get from revisiting some mistake you made or some whatever, you've learned that lesson very damn quickly. I have found in general, for your garden variety sadness that's situational, the best thing you can do is take the baby step forward. And I know there are some people who call me insensitive for saying that, and they really need the time to process. So we're dealing with human beings here. They're not atoms that behave predictably, like electrons that behave quite predictably. Human beings are different, but all things being equal, because I'm talking to you generically here, I believe that in general, when you're situationally sad about some loss, some failure, some whatever, the best thing you can do is take a moment to think about what I can learn about it, and then force yourself, literally force yourself to take a baby step forward. Again, using that suppress and then distract technique. In any event, you're listening to How to Do Life. I'm Marty Nemko. If you're watching on YouTube, of course, you're watching me and you're seeing my scrunched up face as I try to do this. Anyway, when I come back, I'm going to talk about anger, which is something I do know something about. I personally have a tendency to be angry. I'm going to talk about guilt and shame, and then I'm going to summarize. Stay with me. Okay, thank you very much for staying with me. I'm Marty Nemko. This is How to Do Life. And as promised, we're going to talk now a little bit about we're talking about happiness and the inverse, which is dealing with the bad stuff, the garden variety, anxiety and fear, sadness. And now I want to talk about anger. I want to talk about guilt and shame. And then I'm going to summarize some generalizable principles. Okay, anger. I believe, and there is no scientific basis for me saying this is right, I believe that different people secrete different amounts of adrenaline in response to a stress. So that some people, even if something really legitimately has basis for making them angry, they just don't secrete a lot of adrenaline, and so they manage to stay relatively calm. They may feel some anger, but it's not overt, and it's nothing that would cause a problem. I think other people secrete more adrenaline in response to a stress. They're the kind of people, if you're sitting in a room and there's 50 people and a loud bell suddenly goes off, it's the people who jump right out of their seats who have secreted more adrenaline. And they're the people who go from 0 to 60 in 1 second. I'm one of those people. I love my doggy completely. But if he suddenly pulls me, I will get angry for one second. I don't hit him. That's not who I am. But I will say, Hachi. He just put his head up. He's lying here next to me. Anyway, so you can't control, if you are a person who has a tendency to be angry, you cannot control that first second, that first visceral anger. But after that one moment of explosion, and please do not hit your spouse or anything like that, but you yell or you get furious or whatever it is. If you can, make a reflex to take just one deep breath. That slows your heart rate, your blood pressure, and gives you a second to calm down, because you realize that getting angry rarely is wise. Every once in a while you need to demonstrate anger in order to, say somebody's too complacent and all the nicey nice talk in the world hasn't helped. It may help to yell. Not hit, but yell once. But that loses its power. If you do that only more than very occasionally, the yelling is just it'll get tuned out. But forgive yourself if you have a tendency to go from 0 to 60 in 1 second. Forgive yourself that first 1 second. But then get in the habit of saying, I'm going to take a deep breath. One deep breath. That's it. And then that may give you time to remind yourself, hey, showing anger is usually not going to help. In a meeting, at work, with your romantic partner, with your dog. Now I know that shrinks would be more likely to look at what are the root causes of the anger. Did this remind you of your father? Did you feel powerless? Did you feel ignored? Was this, this forgetting to buy, you were going to, and it's a true story, okay? A couple of days ago, my wife and I went to Petaluma, and we heard about this great place called Lala's that has the world's greatest milkshakes. So, I think I did, but I couldn't swear, that I said, we'll split one. We don't need all those calories. Well, she goes and I'm out there waiting outside with the dog, and she goes in. And she ends up buying the flavor she knows I like least, orange chocolate. And I got mad. And again, the first thing I said, I can't believe that. You're so egotistical. You didn't realize that you picked the one flavor you know I wouldn't like. And then I did try to take a deep breath. She got mad at me for yelling at her. She said, I didn't know you wanted to share. And I said, I thought I did tell you that. Anyway, but after that first second, what I did was I then did take the deep breath, and then I tried to use that suppress and distract. I changed the topic. And you know how often I tell my wife, let's change the topic? Because some issues just are not resolvable, at least at that moment. And change the topic as seeming, it's certainly the opposite of what shrinks would tell you, most, not all, what many shrinks would tell you to do. But it has worked in our marriage. I've been with my wife 48 years. I love her. And in her way, I think she loves me. I think that little things like, recognizing what's irreconcilable and don't let that metastasize into a bigger problem. Let's change the topic is deceptively simple, and it works. for at least for my marriage. Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about guilt and shame. So many people feel guilty, both about what they have done, the mistakes they've made, or even survivor guilt. You know, if their sister, God forbid, got run over in a car crash, they feel some guilt about surviving. What do I have to say about guilt? Nothing profound, nothing new. It's the same thing. I think the more you try to talk your way out of the guilt and the shame, the more top of mind it is, and the less likely you are to forgive yourself. Maybe I'm just limited. Maybe I'm just a guy who doesn't have the emotional depth to understand the profundity of the guilt and shame that some people feel and carry with them for their lives and need years of therapy. But, I mean, I think of one bad thing I did. Let's say, I've done it more than one. Let's say the shoplifting. When I was a teenager, I shoplifted, a number of times. A shirt here, a belt there. It was wrong. I don't feel proud of myself. But while committing to not do that again, it's been decades, I don't revisit it. And so the best I can say is when you're feeling guilty or ashamed of something, and I like to use this example of how suppress and distract works. If I were an axe murderer, I'm trying to think of the worst thing I could be. I'm an axe murderer. And whether I got away with it or I served 50 years in prison. But the best I can do to make some kind of exert retribution, not retribution, because it's just compensate, is to not wallow in the guilt and shame, but to force myself to take the next baby step forward. If I were an axe murderer, and I can't say it because I've unfortunately never been one, but if I were an axe murderer, and let's say I just got out of jail, no, even when I got in jail, I would say, damn it, I am going to try to turn my life around. Every criminal says that. But I like to think that rather than waste a moment on guilt and shame, I would say I'm going to be the best damn prisoner I can be. I'm going to be kind to my guards. I'm going to be kind to my fellow people. Now, I know that may be dreaming I'm some middle-class guy who's never seen a jail, and who knows, they may be butt-fucking me like crazy, and I won't have a chance to be nice. They'll view me as a patsy. I have no idea. But I certainly would try to, because I did something so terrible, so heinous as to be an axe murderer, that I would try to be kind to everyone and try to be productive and use my best abilities. If I am, for example, a writer, in that damn prison, I would start writing a book on the lessons I've learned about life and what life in prison is like and whatever. I would try to be as constructive. So I can't help but revert back to the same core principle that I think is the antidote to not severe, depression, schizophrenia, whatever, but for garden variety, anxiety, fear, sadness, anger, guilt, and shame. While everyone is different, one size does not fit all, I believe that generally the wisest thing one can do is to take a deep breath, don't revisit for more than the little time it takes to learn lessons from your mistake, and then distract yourself towards something constructive, taking a baby step forward. Accuse me of being simplistic if you want. That's my best. In any event, I do thank you for watching this episode of How to Do Life. As always, I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you're watching on YouTube. If you would hit the share button below, share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel or to my podcast. It's at simplecast.com. It's called How to Do Life. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.